Hi there. It's November the 13th, and we're continuing our journey today through the letter to the Hebrews. We're in chapter 11, and we're reading from verses 17 through to 31. The writer to the Hebrews has been unpacking the faith of the old characters, the patriarchs of the Hebrew scriptures, pointing to all of these who believed, who trusted God, who had entrusted themselves to God, as he says at the beginning of the chapter, because faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not yet seen. So he's giving examples of that from the Hebrew scriptures, from the stories that would have been so familiar to his Jewish readers to whom he's writing this letter to the Hebrews. So now he continues on in the life of Abraham, and he points to the faith that was involved in Abraham himself offering his son Isaac on the altar. And he points out an interesting thing here. He said that Abraham was prepared to offer Isaac because he believed, his faith was that God would raise him from the dead. Remember in the story of Abraham and Isaac, just a little thing here, that when Abraham goes with Isaac to the sacrifice and leaves the servants behind, he says that they will both return to the servants. How that would be if he was going to kill his son is not clear. But here the writer suggests that Abraham knew that God would give him back Isaac, and so he went in faith. We then read on in the story of Isaac blessing Jacob and Esau, and we know all of the problems associated with that, but still by faith Isaac committed them to God. And then we read of Jacob himself blessing the sons of Joseph, laying his hands on Ephraim and Manasseh. Remember, crossing over his hands as he did that, but also looking into the future and recognizing that these tribes were going to be raised up to be significant, even though they were his grandsons. And then Joseph himself is noted as having prophesied the departure of Israel from Egypt, and therefore asks for his bones to be carried with them. And we can see this right at the end of the book of Genesis, in Genesis 50, where Joseph indeed says that they're going to return to Israel, and therefore asks them to carry his bones with them when they finally make the Exodus. Then the writer moves on to the figure of Moses, this one who was, in that sense, the great prophet of Israel, the one who was the great mediator to Israel of the covenant law. And it says that by faith his parents kept him. They didn't give him up for killing, even though it was such a dangerous thing to do, that Moses himself, when he grew up, was prepared to say no to all of the treasures of Egypt, to say no to the privileged life he'd enjoyed in Pharaoh's household. There's an interesting thing here in verse 26 of chapter 11 here, where it talks about Moses being prepared to suffer for the sake of Messiah rather than enjoy the treasures of Egypt. And this is interesting because obviously Moses wasn't living in Jesus' time, wasn't living in Messiah's time, but there's something here about the idea of Moses seeing down the centuries what was coming, seeing the future, the one who was coming, who would bring God's kingdom to Israel, and therefore he is willing to suffer and go through what he goes through for that longing. And then of course Moses by faith leads the people through the Red Sea, having taken them through Passover, and then they come into the promised land. By faith Israel went around Jericho for 7 days. And then again there's one very interesting last person here who's mentioned, that is Rahab the harlot, the prostitute, who takes in the Israelite spies when they are spying out Jericho. And this is an interesting person to be noted as someone who has faith, but she saw that by faith she would be preserved. Even though she was in a city that was going to be destroyed, she actually trusted God, and God rescued her. By the way, it's interesting that Rahab is one of those 4 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew 1. So here we have these heroes, this hall of fame of faith. Many different people, many different circumstances. Some of these didn't survive to see all that they had trusted God for. So Joseph in particular is talking about trusting for things that are happening beyond his lifetime. We can be sure then that faith is what we're called to Trust in God in every circumstance, whatever the outcomes, because He is the one who knows the beginning from the end. He knows our start from our ceasing, and He will take us on through that faith if we will trust Him as these heroes of faith did. Have a very good November 13th.